Today is Monday, March 7th, 1988. Rabbi Shimon Kessin on Mashiach process.
There's something wrong with your pin connection. Okay.
It says.
The essence of the matter is as follows: is that discussing the Mashiach really represents the Frankenstein of the Jewish people. That's what it is. Normally, a person's own sins become his own Frankenstein, or his own suffering. It's the evil suddenly coming out of him, turning around and becoming alive to torment him. And as it does so, it disappears. But what happens with the Mashiach is that the Mashiach, unfortunately, is subject to the Frankenstein of everybody else. So whereas each one of us has only our own Frankenstein running after us, the Mashiach has millions of Frankensteins running after him. You see, that in essence is the suffering of the Mashiach. That's what we mean when the Mashiach is in the klippus. The Mashiach is in the depths of the tumah. It means that he essentially is enveloped by the power of the Chatoim of all Klal Yisrael, and that's what keeps him down. Now let's go on in terms of the actual process of the Gula, or the redemption itself. We have till now been talking about what's called the Ikvas of the Mashiach. The Ikvas of the Mashiach is the last generation before the Mashiach. It is therefore the worst one, and we have gone through an analysis of some of its important features. The Ikvas Mashiach is also characterized by what's called the Chevre Mashiach, which is really it's a suffering, the enormous suffering that will happen to the Jews before the Mashiach comes. And that is the part and parcel of the last generation, or the Ikvas Mashiach. I personally would not hesitate to say that it would be the Holocaust, which fit the perfect description for what they consider to be the Chevle HaMashiach. Once the Chevle HaMashiach is over, then the Geula begins to start in earnest. When the actual Geula begins to start, that is called the Aschalta de Geula. The word Aschalta means Tchila, Haskala, which means beginning of the Geula. Now, what exactly is the Aschalta de Geula? What exactly characterizes the beginning of the Geula? Well, that's a very interesting question, you see. As we've said, that there are two components of the Geula. There are two aspects of the Geula. There's the redemption as it occurs to the Jews, and there's the redemption as it occurs to the Mashiach. Remember, those are the two parts of the Geula, not one. You see, all of us are always accustomed to think of the fact that the redemption has to do with the Jews. Nobody thinks about the poor Mashiach, you see. But the fact is that since he reflects the Jews, the redemption equally applies to him. We have discussed what the Mashiach and the Jews look like in the last generation. What happens in the Eschatz Gula? What happens to the Mashiach and what happens to the Jews? Well, first let's talk about the Mashiach, because that's really where it starts, basically. The Mashiach begins to experience a removal of the enormous restrictions which were placed on him. And he begins to become in contact with his light. We've said before, to some degree, what that's involved, and we said is that, basically, the Mashiach comes to an understanding himself about the nature or the essence of a chet on the human personality and on the human spirit. And as he understands the mechanism of this itself, he begins to restore himself to a balance. So the real Geula starts, in a certain sense, with this insight of the Mashiach in terms of his own problems. The Mashiach begins to elevate. He goes to various different levels. And the first level that he goes to is what's called the level of the sin, which is, the sin represents the first level, which begins to represent the Mashiach acquiring the light of the Mashiach itself. As the light begins to come down, the first ray of that light is represented by the letter sin. And Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says that that's what's represented in the pasuk of Isaiah, Yeshaya, Hine Yaskel Abdi. Behold, my servant will become wise. And the word Yaskel or Haskalah represents the beginning of the descent of the Messianic light, the Oro Shel Mashiach. And at that point, the Mashiach becomes a totally different person. See? Before that time, he was on the level which is represented by the letter Samach. And that letter represents the Mashiach in a state of kilkul. when the Messianic light is still distant from him. The Mashiach further develops, and what happens is he then goes on the next level, which is represented by the letter Shin. And that represents the Messianic light coming down in its full power. So that the development of the Mashiach occurs in the following way. First is the removal of its personal problems. Now, as we said last time, there are two different types of personal problems that the Mashiach has, which is represented by the Pasuk, the Mashiach is profaned in his spirit, which means that he has pneumistic problems. He has an internal mental problem, and he is crushed from the outside in terms of external problems of life. Two things that are bothering him. Internal and external. Mechulam Abshenu means that the Mashiach is profaned because of the sins of the Jews. Profaned always refers to a damage to the neshama, like a Kohen. A Kohen who cannot go into the Beit HaMikdash to perform the service because he's a son of, let's say, of a woman who was divorced because his father, or rather his father, who was a Kohen, married a divorced woman. That son is called a Cholol, who's a Kohen who cannot go into the Beit HaMikdash and do the service. Why not? Because there's something wrong in his neshama. His neshama no longer has the ability, you see, to bring down the atonement for the Jews. That's called Cholol. He's profane. But this effect, is a profanation of the internal spirit. And the Mashiach is said to have Mechulam Mepshenu also, which means that we learn from this that the Mashiach is damaged in his internal spirit. And from the other psukim where it says, Le'eved nimka Yosef, Ba'al Bo Nafshoy, that Yosef was sold as a slave. What does it mean as slaves? Yosef is sold as a slave, an iron yoke is placed on his soul. We see that the main problem of the Mashiach is this cholo problem, and therefore he's damaged in the soul. And as we said, this damage in essence is also a personality problem, and as such, what it is the Mashiach does not have access to his light. In some mysterious way, the Mashiach does not have access to his light, because of some internal upheaval. In addition, it says, Umeduka b'amonasenu, the Mashiach is crushed, because of the transgressions of Klal Yisrael, and crushed, of course, refers to a physical, external catastrophe of some sort, so that the personal life of the Mashiach is ripped apart. Now, what exactly that means is not clear. What does that mean, the personal life or the external situation of the Mashiach? We are not clear what that means. Just when the Ramchal is about to talk about it, the Sefer ends. Yes. Unfortunately, the Sefer ends, just when he's about to go into it. But the fact is, and this is the thing, that all of this, and this is the important concept. And if you understand this concept, you will understand the essence of the exile and therefore the essence of the Gula. The entire exile is referred to as a gezela, as a robbery. Why? Because when a person does a sin, that kedusha which he should possess goes to the hands of the Satan, and it's used against him. That's the Frankenstein. But in a sense, it's called a theft. It's not a real theft because he himself abandoned his own light. But it's considered a gezela. It is. Therefore, exile is a process of robbery, where the Satan takes away the kedusha of the person and shoves the person into a golus, into an exile. He's in a state of darkness. His soul is in darkness, and his life is in darkness. He is in exile. The redemption, which is the opposite process, you see, is what? The geula. And that's really a state of the return of the theft, which is called in Hebrew, hashava. And there's a mitzvah of hashavat gzela. You've got to return what you steal. You see. So therefore, the entire process of the Gula's redemption is nothing more than a process of what? Of returning that which was stolen or robbed. Okay? That's what it is. And when you look at the Mashiach, since he suffers from two angles, he suffers externally and internally. The question is, which one begins to unfetter itself first? The external or the internal? That's the question. It is clear, it's definite to me that it's external which first comes things. The first. The external is always the one that's first redeemed and rehabilitated. And once the external is rehabilitated, then comes the internal. Which means that whatever is represented by the crushed life of the Mashiach is restored and undone. So that suddenly the Mashiach finds himself in a very good, what do you call it, external situation. One of the clues to what the Mashiach ben Yosef specifically feels in his life when he's crushed is from what we can see what Yosef felt in the opposite way. The unique quality of Yosef was the fact, and that's what it says that what Potiphar noticed about Yosef when he was sold to him, is that there's something about Yosef which everything that he does turns out alright. He's matzliach. And the pasuk says, V'Hashem matzliach et yodai. And that's why Yosef had to change to Potiphar, whoever knew him. Because there's something about Yosef that always worked. They all saw that the hand of God was over him, and that he was always matzliach. It's true that he had a hard life, Yosef. He was in prison, and this and that, he was in slavery, and so on. But there was something about him that whatever he touched turned to gold. Yosef has a Midas touch. Yes. Yosef has a Midas touch of Hatzlacha. And there's a reason why. Because the essence of Kedusha is what? Is power, or existence. And the one who possesses the Kedusha possesses existence or reality, and that's the power of success, to get things done. And in Hebrew that's referred to as Oz. Yosef is a unique possessor of Oz when he has it. Yosef had incredible Oz, or strength. It was a strength to be successful, because there was something about his control over Kedusha. The Mashiach ben Yosef, who is in a state of deprivation, is lacking in that exact thing. Which means that the one thing which characterizes the Mashiach ben Yosef, more than anything else, is an absolute lack of success. That's really what it is. He is unsuccessful in his internal attempts to what? To draw down his spiritual life. He cannot grow in the spiritual life. He cannot really become what he is. He's not successful. No matter what he does, no matter how many times he bangs his head against the wall, it just doesn't go. He sees the Messianic life, but he cannot move towards it. And then in his external life, he is totally unsuccessful. Whatever he does, fails. Year after year after year. You see. It's a lack of Oz which Mashiach ben Yosef has. It's a lack of Oz in the external sense and in the internal sense. When the Geula starts, the process is reversed. So that suddenly the Mashiach sees himself with incredible success. But the success starts externally. So that suddenly, in whatever way, the Mashiach begins to experience an enormous accomplishment. And then it goes internally. And as we explained, the internal aspect is that the Mashiach actually lifts himself up and removes the internal barrier. Because the internal barrier is the mechanism of Chet itself inserted into the Mashiach. And when the Mashiach through his Chokhmah understands that mechanism and removes it, he cures himself and the mechanism of Chet. And then he goes ahead and cures everybody else. We've explained this last time. But this is the point. The Geula, which is the redemption, is the opposite of the Hashava. The opposite of the Hashava. That's why it says in the Pasuk that the Baruch Shem, it says by Nishmas, by Shabbat, when you daven, Matul Oni Megoizloi. The Baruch Shem saved the poor man from his robber. What does that mean, the Baruch Shem saved the poor man from his robber? The man is poor because he was robbed. Maybe the man was poor because he just didn't make a good living. No, the man is poor because he was robbed. Who is God talking about? The Jews and the Mashiach. That's in essence what it is. The Jews are called aniyim, or impoverished. Why are they impoverished? They're impoverished because they've been robbed. Who robbed them? The Satan. The Satan took away all their koichos. You see. And that's what it says. When Amalek attacked the Jews, after they were freedom, the Baruch Shem says to the Jews, Amalek did not fear God. He attacked you when you were weary and tired. Va'ato oyef v'yogeya. You were weary and tired. And even though you were weary and tired, Amalek attacked you. What was the Baruch Shem saying? It wasn't that you were weary and tired physically. Spiritually you were down. And Amalek suddenly saw the opportunity and then attacked you. You see, when it says the bracha in the morning, Hanoising Yoev Koyach, God gives what? Strength to the one who's tired. He's not talking about the one who's tired in the sense, the one who's simply physically tired and exhausted because he went to sleep 4 o'clock in the morning. You see, you don't need God to give you koyach, just go to sleep a little earlier. You know? That's not God's problem, that's yours. But Hayoyev refers to the person who's spiritually down, who's involved with chatoyim, and the Baruch Shem gives him the koyach to go on, constantly to go on. You see, and that's the essence of the Mashiach. The Mashiach is an incredible oyev. He is very, very tired. The Jews are very, very tired, and what the Baruch Shem does is it says, Matzon Oni Megozei. The Baruch Shem saved the Jews from their robber, and their robber is the Satan. Now, of course, the bottom line is that the Jews allowed themselves to be robbed. That's the bottom line. So let's not blame God over here. The fact is, but the process is called robbery. So the Gula is called Hashava, and that's what happens. The Mashiach slowly begins to experience the Hashava, or the return of his power, the return of his external Hatzlacha, and the return of his internal Hatzlacha. Okay? We understand now what's going to happen with the Mashiach, exactly basically the process of the redemption itself. Personally, as it will be experienced by the Mashiach. That is the true beginning of the Gula. And it is a process which none of us will ever know. For the simple reason that it's a private process. It is not public. It happens to the Mashiach and to the Mashiach alone. And unless you are the Mashiach, you have no idea that it's happening. So it is something that the Jews nor the rest of the world will know that it's happening. It may be happening right now. We do not know. You see. But it is something which is happening to a single individual, to the man who's destined to be Mashiach. The interesting thing is, I once saw written in the Sefer, an interesting thing, where Rav Avram Azuloi, who's the father of Chaim Yosef Dover Azuloi, the Chida, I don't know if you've heard of him, wrote that he heard in the name of Chaim Vital, the greatest student of the Ari, about the Mashiach, and I never saw this anywhere else. It is an astounding thing. It's something I always suspected, but I never saw until I actually saw it written. He says that initially the Mashiach does not know that he's the Mashiach. And I've explained that before. And then, when it's close to the time, it's presented to him that he's Mashiach. And he's obviously aghast. Or whatever the story is. And then he suddenly begins to undo the damage. He says himself, he begins to lift off whatever damage that is. And after he lifts off the damage, he says something which I've never seen written anywhere else, but it's extraordinary. He says that the Mashiach takes a private tour into heaven. The Mashiach goes up into the Shemayim for 40 days, like Moshe Rabbeinu, to bring down the full Messianic light. But nobody knows that this goes on. Nobody. Whereas when the Jews left Egypt, everybody knew that Moshe went up. Nobody will know that the Mashiach will ascend into the Shemayim for 40 days. Now, what does that mean that he will ascend? Does that mean he's going to literally physically go up? No, probably not. Not like Moshe did, because Moshe physically went up. His body literally changed in the process to go up. Okay. The Mashiach probably will not. The Mashiach probably, most likely, or I'm not sure, will experience an aliyah of his neshama, so that he will be fully conscious as the Mashiach goes up into the Shemayim and brings down the light. Something that order, I would imagine. But that's what the Chaim Vital says, and it's a fascinating thing. But again, nobody will know that this is going on. It is after the Mashiach comes down that suddenly the effect of the Gula will be felt by the Jews. That's when suddenly he's going to become public. And as I said before, how will he be public? He's not going to advertise in the Jewish press that he's arrived, although that probably would be the proper place. What? Yes, you can now see the headline. Mashiach has arrived. Or, no, the headline will be, finally! But in essence, what will happen is that, as I said, the clue to the problem is that he will resolve or remove the Ola. You see, because the problem that the Mashiach has is an Ola problem, if I may call it that. He will remove the Ola of the Klal Yisrael, of all the Jews, from their hearts, because he will understand the mechanism of Chet, and the way that Chet diminishes consciousness, so that he will restore all men to the consciousness of Adam Rishon before the Chet. Now the question is, when the Mashiach is going through this entire process, what's happening to the Jews? What are they going through? So now let's focus and go over to the other side of the point and see what's happening to Klal Yisrael, the other key element of the Gula. Okay, what's happening to Klal Yisrael is the beginning of an enormous agitation. We have not seen this yet, although I don't believe that this has yet existed. And we see this yet, no matter what people say. What is this agitation? There's going to come a day, one day, hopefully very soon, everybody's going to wake up in the morning, and suddenly the world will be different. And everybody will know it. Nothing will have changed outside. Absolutely nothing. Everything. You'll still get your mail in the morning. The milkman will still deliver his milk in the morning. Okay? You'll still get up and go to shul in the morning, whatever the story is. But something will be different. What will be different is that you will no longer be satisfied with the goals that you've had in life. And I mean not that suddenly you're not satisfied because you're frustrated and you're not successful. You will find yourself with very powerful diminishing interest in money, in clothes, in wealth, fame, all these things. And suddenly what happens, you will find yourself with a very powerful interest in knowing what is truth. And you will really feel it. So in other words, what will change is not the external world, but the internal consciousness of man. Man will wake up that day as a new person with a new neshama. A new neshama will descend in the night, so to speak, metaphorically, so to speak, and everyone will wake up with a different consciousness the next day. And from that day on, starts something like you have never seen at all. What will that consciousness look like? And to say to you, there's a story that once there was a fellow in Yerushalayim where someone was running around the street saying, the Mashiach comes, the Mashiach has come. And there was some tzaddik that stuck his head out the window and said, funny, it doesn't feel any different. But that was it. It doesn't feel any different. Mashiach cannot arrive without feeling differently. The arrival of the Mashiach is not the arrival of an individual that comes to a town, a guest in a town and so on. And it's on the newspapers that we have some very important guests. That's not what it is. The arrival of the Mashiach is a personal elevation of awareness in each individual. That goes along with the arrival of the Mashiach. Actually precedes the arrival of the Mashiach. And what we will begin to see is an enormous turbulence among the Jews. And we will describe that turbulence.
I wanted to ask, is it going to happen to everybody at once, or in some degree, some people will be aware sooner than others? Like all of a sudden everybody will wake up and say, ooh, something else happening, or like
That's
everyone else is feeling it now. Yes, exactly. Right. Exactly, right, because I'm definitely a changed person since I'm listening to your I'm a different person, and that's true.
Yeah, I'm really serious. I first started feeling it.
I hope I change a lot more.
I know, but I was just saying.
But it's you see, my outlook in life, everything, my values are changing.
Yeah, well, you're different neshama.
I just want to know if this is going to happen first to individuals with a little bit higher awareness, and then the rest will
How to
follow.
answer that question?
Or we'll all wake up one morning and say, hey,
I know, I think we're the poorer for it to having it.
Yes.
what?
I think we're the poorer for it to having it. I think that everyone in this class must have thought we were going to be, and like Kessie said that I feel like that when I wake up in the morning.
Right.
But are we happier because of it?
Oh, yes, I am so much more happy. Oh, I can't. I'm not the same person. Are you kidding? Completely. Of course, I know. I remember when I first.
But doesn't it make you angry that other people are
No, not at all.
satisfied with less?
Absolutely not.
They have a greater
Not
satisfaction
satisfied.
level.
No, they do not. No.
Oh,
It's
not
also
true.
they have hate and they have jealousy. You see, I have come to understand that we are all one neshama, and so if somebody is mean to me, then I say, well, that poor person. I have no anger anymore. Most of the time.
Let me try and answer this question. Let me try and deal with this. Let's discuss this agitation, or the turbulence that we'll see. And believe me, it's a turbulence. The Pasuk tells us the turbulence. It says, "Hinei yomim boim." There will come days. Sheyesh ro'ah ba'aretz. There will be a famine in the land. You see, Aval lo yiv'adu lechem. It is not a famine for bread. It is not a thirst for water. Kin lidvar Hashem. It will be a famine to know the word of God. That's what it says. The Pasuk says it. It's considered the 10th famine. It is not a physical famine, but it has the power of a famine. Literally, it has the power of a famine. People will be starving. People will be miserable. You see, not miserable because they don't have things to eat or what. They will be rich. They will be miserable because they will feel what happens when you want the truth and it is not around. They will suddenly feel an incredible hole in the middle of their brain and in the middle of the heart, and they'll feel that hole. They'll suddenly realize that there's an image far greater than the physical, and there'll be a real famine, and people will starve. People will be in a lot of suffering because of it, and they're going to search. They're going to run around. They're going to run around to see the emes. and they will not find it. They're going to run to the yeshivas. It will not be there. It won't. It will not satisfy them. They will run to the Rosh Yeshivas. They will run to all the great people of today. It will not be satisfied. Because the kind of famine that they will experience, the type of truth that will quench that thirst, is only the life of the Mashiach itself. That's what it is. What the people need is a Mashiach. You see, not just another Magid Shia, or whatever the story is. They need a Mashiach because the drive on the sensitivity to Ruchnius will be greater than what anyone can deliver today, in any sense. And this will go on for a certain while. This will go on a certain while. It has to go on. This is the environment which must precede the Mashiach. Because if this does not precede the Mashiach, then the Mashiach will come to an empty people. Because nobody will recognize who he is, you see. Like I heard some expression, you cannot talk to somebody who has no ears. The Baruch Shem has to give Klal Yisrael ears. What are the ears of Klal Yisrael? The ears of Klal Yisrael is salvation, the spirituality. That gives you ears. When you're too happy in Olam Hazeh, or you're too happy, or you're too consumed with running after materialistic goals, wealth or position, or whatever the story is, you have no ears for Ruchnius. So what the Baruch Shem says, my Gula comes first with reconstructing the ears of the Jews. We will give them new ears, you see. And the neshama will descend, and everybody will wake up, approximately at the same time. Now, does that mean that there are not people who have the sensitivity earlier? No, there will be a gradual reawakening. It is. It's true. What happens is, and this is it is, when the Gemara compares the ultimate redemption, the Gemara compares it to sunrise rather. And there was a famous story in this Yerushalmi, where two great Tanoim, I forget their names, are walking along, and they see the mountains, they see the sun beginning, the dawn beginning to come up. And one says to the other, this is how the Guru will take place, if it is Be'ita, means, because it's brought by God, not by us. It will become very, very slowly. And I think I've gone through the whole concept of why it's very slowly, going very slowly so that nobody notices, especially the Sultan. But what happens is, when you look at the dawn, how does it happen? First of all, it's darkest before the dawn. Therefore, the period right before the Mashiach comes is also the darkest. And what happens with the dawn is, first the rays of light begin to come over the horizon. Slight rays of light. And then the light gets stronger and stronger, but you don't see the sun yet. And for a while, the light is getting stronger and stronger, very slowly. And then suddenly, the disk of the sun bursts over the horizon, and boom, it is day. That's very similar to what will happen in the end. There will be a gradual reawakening of the Jews. There will be people slowly begin to develop ears, that they'll know that there's something missing, you see. And there'll be slowly more and more people, some people here, some people there, whatever stories, beginning to develop ears and listening, searching in different places. In a slow process. But you will not see the major famine occur. Not yet. You will see it, what? You will see a slow reawakening until a certain point. And suddenly, there will be an enormous famine occurs so that suddenly everybody will wake up. Everyone. Within a very short period of time. And that is the true beginning of the Mashiach. We don't see that today. Not really. We see a gradual reawakening in some people. But the truth of the matter is, most Jews, unfortunately, are devoid of ears yet. That's why we know that this period has not arrived. You may see that there's a Baal Tshuva movement. I'm not talking about Baal Tshuva movement. I'm talking about the redemption of Israel. Okay? Which is far more sophisticated than your Baal Tshuva movement in America and Israel. The redemption of Israel has not arrived, really. Because most people don't have ears. But when you one day wake up and you see people suddenly running around and saying, what's going on here? I don't really care for this stuff. I don't really care to go to work anymore, really. I really want to understand what's going on out there. And I don't mean because they're lazy, you see. Really. And when you see this en masse, you will know that what is going on in public corresponds to what probably has happened in private to the Mashiach. That he is already on the way to his redemption. And he's already in the middle of his process. That's the sign. That's the first awakening with Klal Yisrael of the Aschat of the Gula, as far as the Jews are. Now, another aspect, so therefore we see the Aschat of the Gula, the beginning of the Gula, as far as the Mashiach is concerned, and as far as the Jews are concerned. But yet there's a third aspect, which has to do with the land of Israel. As I told you, a redemption always goes to the external part and then the internal part. The Golus, which is the exile, is the reverse. The Golus is always first internally and then externally. And we see that from the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, how? First the Shekhinah departed, and then the Romans came in and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash physically. Because had the Shekhinah been there, nobody goes in without instant death. The reason why Titus and Nebuchadnezzar before were able to enter into the Holy of Holies and destroy it, because there was no more Shekhinah there, really. The presence or the power of the Bonishim had left. Which means the power of God had left because it had already left from each individual's heart. You see, the Jews had already exiled God from them personally. So therefore the Bonishim simply followed suit and exiled the Shekhinah. But that means that the Golus or the exile was an internal matter first. Then it was an external matter. Once God was no longer directly present among the Jews, and the Shekhinah was in exile, then the Roman hordes came in, or the Babylonian hordes came in and destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, and then took the Jews out of the land of Israel. The Geula, which is the redemption, happens in the reverse way. First the land of Israel must be built up, you see, and then the Jews will go back and begin to elevate themselves spiritually. It's the same thing with death and the resurrection of the dead, you see. How does a person die? Death occurs how? The neshama leaves. First there's the exile, or the withdrawal of the spiritual part. And then after the neshama leaves, what happens to the body? The body then decays. And the body then decompensates, deteriorates. The resurrection of the dead is the opposite. When the Bonishim wants to resurrect the dead, what will he do? Bring down the neshama? To what? First he has to take the body and repair it, resurrect it, put it back together. And then the neshama goes into a repaired body. That's the way the ultimate redemption will happen as well. First the land of Israel has to be awakened, and the people have to come back and begin to build the land of Israel. And since the last Gula will happen by teva, or through natural means, we can expect that the entire return of the Jews to Israel will be through natural means. You see. That's the first step. The guf, or the body of the land, has to be restored. Then comes the spiritual restoration. And that's the famine which will occur. So that not only will every Jew in America, but every Jew in Israel and around the world will wake up on one day and run around to find out what the truth is. When that day occurs, you know that we are on the threshold of the messianic explosion. You see. The true, where the light will suddenly come down, and it's a spiritual redemption. I have not seen that take place. I don't believe at this date that I'm making this tape, okay, as of this date, that really has occurred here yet. I really don't believe that, because we don't see that. We don't see that spiritual awakening. We see, which I believe is the restoration of the body, in many cases, you see. But we see nothing really yet that talks about the restoration of the neshama of Klal Yisrael. The soul of Israel is still in exile. The Shekhinah is still in exile. That's what has to be restored. And that's the next step. That step must be imminent.
Where do you see the restoration of the body?
Probably the return to the land of Israel.
Oh, but no. People are leaving Israel.
Well, here and there, but in essence they're there.
Oh.
And they're building up the country, yeah.
So you going to say anything until this is the 40th year?
No, I'm not going to say anything.
Why not?
Because what am I going to say?
What do you say?
What am I going to say?
1948.
I mean, there must be some
What
40
about
There probably is, because 40 represents the Tahara.
Really?
40 represents the
Okay,
Tahara.
so is it going to be like, wake up Rosh Hashanah and, or Yom Kippur? Or
Look, if I were Jimmy the Greek, I'd give you odds. But I'm not.
You can't lie, you're paying. You can lose your job.
You know, I told you this. I was Jimmy the Greek, I'd give you odds. 7 to 1, okay?
Right, to stay with the said in May, right?
May, yeah.
Rabbi, is
I
Amalek a
believe that you
prophet?
mentioned that already in other classes, that this is the time of Mashiach.
Yes.
Our generation,
Yes,
very
yes,
close
yes,
generation. Do you feel that? But on the other hand, you say that
The spiritual.
Malchus didn't but didn't.
No. We must remember, the Eschat de Gula occurs in many steps. You see. Although it is impossible to ascertain for sure, what we do realize probably is that the Eschat de Gula, in my opinion, has begun. I personally have absolutely no doubt that has occurred for many, many reasons, you see. But whether it has occurred or not, what I also feel just as strongly is that the phase of the Aschat de Geula, which refers to the spiritual redemption, has not occurred yet. And I don't care how many Baal Tshuva come back. It is not the thing that we're looking for. But I personally believe that it is imminent. I believe that it is imminent. The return of the Neshama to Klal Yisrael is imminent. And that's the true beginning of the Geula. That's really the Aschat de Geula. And that starts the real phase. Now what happens is that the Jews will run around, like I told you, in a turbulent agitation, looking for the emes. They will go all over the place and nobody will have it, except one man. And that man is the Mashiach. So suddenly, the Shidduch is complete. Okay? The leader will find his people, and the people will find their leader. And the Shidduch, or the Zivug, is complete. It is through, then, the Mashiach that the people will begin to return. Now I want to go into that more clearly. Yeah. No, not yet. Kibbutz Goliath doesn't take place yet. Kibbutz Goliath. Goliath. That's not in there. I'm up to here yet. I'm not down here.
That's when all the Jews come back to Israel.
Yes, but that's later.
Where is the Satan or
Wait, she didn't finish.
I'm sorry.
Are all the Jews come back to Israel from the 100 Gog and Magog?
Yes.
So there won't be no Jews will be harmed.
When I get to Kibbutz Goliath, we'll discuss that. We'll get to these two in a minute.
We're going to be discussing, first of all, I want to ask you, is the Melech, or the
Amalek.
Is he a prophet in his own way?
No.
No?
No.
There's no prophecy
No.
in telling. Well, where is the Satan in all of this? I mean, if the Jews are going to look around,
he's doing his hardest to make sure this all doesn't happen.
Working overtime. He's going to try his best to stay alive. So when the Jews are looking
at
the
Satan will be in the act of dying. What can I say?
So how is he going to look in the act of dying in the Bria?
Like a sick man, like a sick angel.
Show himself in the.
What if you use some of your mathematics? You know,
sympathy over here.
What's that? No. Don't you understand?
I remember.
The act of dying, the Satan's dying is his refuah shlema. Because what dies is the perverse part, not the real part. Yes.
This has much to do with it, but an Amalek wants to become a Jew.
Yeah.
Can they become a Jew?
An Amalek become a Jew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He can.
I've never heard of an Amalek that wants to be a Jew.
No, I mean, there are some people who might, you don't know what God is an Amalek.
I know.
How could that be if you said it
A guy comes to you and wants to become a Jew. You cannot look into his soul, and if he does what's required, you accept him. You see.
Right, but and let's say he is an Amalek.
No true Amalek will ever be a Jew. It doesn't work. No Amalek will ever be inspired to be a Jew. The only thing that inspires an Amalek is the death of a Jew.
And that's everyone?
Every Amalek. That's not every German is an Amalek. A true Amalek.
How do you know what's a true Amalek?
You don't.
What's a true Amalek?
You don't. A person with Ruach Kodesh would. Who has a neshama of an Amaleki? Yeah, I have a neshama of an Amaleki.
We don't know that.
No.
Someone from Spain can have neshama.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be.
Yes. No. I personally don't believe that the German people are Amalekites. I believe that the SS, the Germans were Amalek. The SS, the head guys, Hitler and the SS and so on, they were Amalekites. And the German people are Esav, the worst part of Esav. But I don't believe that the German people themselves were Amalek.
So not all of Germany will be totally destroyed.
No.
I read that Eliyahu was supposed to come back before Mashiach, so how would he fit into this?
That's, you got yourself a good question there. That's a really very good question, huh? Really good question.
What about the base?
Okay, let me just,
what about
wait.
Base of bigness? Isn't that goes?
That's later. The question is asked, which is an important one, is what is the role of Eliyahu Hanavi in all of this? And the truth is that's an excellent question. And I can give a partial answer from what I understand, but I cannot give a complete answer. Eliyahu Hanavi there are two beings besides the Mashiach that play a very powerful role in the entire redemption. One is the Mashiach himself. Now when I say Mashiach here, I'm talking about the Mashiach ben Yosef. He is the one that I'm really talking about. Mashiach ben David has not appeared in any real sense at all. He may exist or not, that's irrelevant. But in a real sense, he is not part of all this. It is the Mashiach ben Yosef. It is the Mashiach ben Yosef. It is the Mashiach ben Yosef who is involved in the Tahara, the redemption of Israel. Now there are two other individuals who are very, very important members of that besides Mashiach ben Yosef. One is Moshe Rabbeinu. The neshama of Moshe Rabbeinu reappears to the Mashiach ben Yosef and seems to instruct him on how to run the Gula. Having been a man of experience already, Moshe Rabbeinu is in an excellent position to tell him what to do. Now I don't know that Moshe Rabbeinu necessarily tells him everything what to do, but there is some kind of mysterious relationship that Moshe Rabbeinu has with the Mashiach. And there's a reason for that. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a Mashiach. He wasn't a finished Mashiach, but he was a Mashiach. That is very critical to understand. Even though his generation failed to bring in the Messianic period, he himself was a partial Mashiach. Because the fact of the matter is that the Jews originally did bring in the Messianic period. And this is a very interesting thing. What we will see now is not the total development of a Messianic period, the partial development. The truth of the matter is we already live with a piece of the Messianic light. Because if you remember what I said, when Moshe brought down the Torah, he brought down the second tablet. That second tablet was the Messianic light in a broken form. Which means that there was a certain part of the Messianic light which is already here. I said Moshe did accomplish certain aspects of phases of the Messianic process. He therefore was involved in some way. I am not clear exactly what his role really is. The other individual who is a very important part of the role is Eliyahu Navi. I do not clearly know the role of Eliyahu Navi, although Eliyahu Navi is supposed to be the forerunner, the announcer of the Gula in some way, and he's supposed to restore the hearts of the men, of fathers to their sons and sons to the fathers and so on, and become involved in the Gula in certain ways. Exactly when he does these things is not clear, but I do have suspect that there is one other thing that he has to do, which in some way is a very mysterious hidden thing, and it has to do with who Eliyahu Navi is. Eliyahu Navi really was Pinchas. The Medrash says that Pinchas, who is one of the grandsons of Aaron, was the question that we have is the concept of Eliyahu Navi, and Eliyahu Navi was once Pinchas. Pinchas is one of the grandsons of Aaron, and Pinchas was involved in one of the important events of the Jews. The Jews became very involved promiscuously with another nation. And what happened was that Pinchas stopped, and they experienced the plague. And what happened? Pinchas stopped the plague because Pinchas was a very great zealot or kanoi, a very powerful defender of the honor of God. And what it was that Pinchas went ahead, and it's part of Pinchas actually, and saved the Jews by killing the main people who were involved in this promiscuous activity that the Jews were having. And because of that, he stopped the plague which was killing many Jews. And what Moshe Rabbeinu said that the blessing that God gave him, that he made Pinchas in charge of the Bris Shalom, that he says. And in a deeper sense, what happened is that somehow Pinchas, who became Eliyahu Navi, lived for a long time, for 700 years, and he became Eliyahu Navi. Yes, that's right. What happened is that Eliyahu Navi in some way is a master of the whole concept of the bris and the concept of the olah. That's why Eliyahu Navi comes to every bris. Why does Eliyahu Navi come to every bris, really? Because Eliyahu Navi is involved in some way with the tahara of the bris. He's involved with the tikkun habris in some mysterious way. And Eliyahu Navi in some way understands exactly the essence of the mechanism of chet. Therefore, Eliyahu Navi in some way is deeply connected with the whole kilkul or problem of the Mashiach ben Yosef. So therefore, what I believe is that Eliyahu Navi will enter into the scene to assist the Mashiach ben Yosef in bringing about his own redemption. You see? Because he's uniquely associated with the concept of Tikkun HaBris more than anyone else. But other types of aspects which you're involved in, that's something which really has to be yet clearly understood. Now let us go on about the agitation or the turbulence which the Jews will experience. And as we said, there will be an enormous difficulty that the Jews will have, and they will run around and look for some kind of spiritual guide leader, and the one who will appear on the scene is the Mashiach. He is the one who will actually do this. Now, what the Rambam or Maimonides says about the Mashiach is obviously totally really what it is. But the Rambam sees it from a different angle. Everything that I said now is based on the writings of Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, who takes his information from the writings of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Ari, the greatest Kabbalist in the last almost 2,000 years. But the Rambam, who was not in the Kabbalistic school itself, for different reasons, understands Mashiach in a similar light, but to some degree is different. And the Rambam sees the Mashiach basically operationally. And operationally means by what the Mashiach does. How will the Jews know who the Mashiach is? Because the Mashiach will be an individual who will be able to makarev all Jews. He's the man who can get up and literally make every Jew frum. That's the basic thing. And if a man gets up and makes every Jew frum, that must be the Mashiach. If he, in addition, is able to take the Jews out and bring them to the land of Israel, you see, and bring back all the exiled Jews back to the land of Israel and build the Beit HaMikdash, he surely is the Mashiach. So that our Rambam judges who the Mashiach will be depending on what he's able to do. So it's in the other way, you see. But essentially, this is very similar to what we're saying. The important earmark of the Mashiach, and the thing which is very important about him, is that the Mashiach will be like Moshe Rabbeinu. And the thing which Moshe Rabbeinu excelled in most is that Moshe Rabbeinu had access to the divine light, to the divine light, number one, and that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to give this light to the Jews. The Mashiach will also excel in this ability. He will serve as a conduit for this light, the Messianic light, which is much more powerful than the light that Moshe brought down, because it's a pure form of that light. It's the light of the Mashiach itself. And he will be the conduit to give that over to the Jews. But it must go through him. And he will have the conduit, or the channel, to give it over to the entire Jewish people. Now, which Jews would respond to the Mashiach and which will not? And that's an interesting question. Will all Jews respond in the same way? No. The ability that a Jew has to learn from Mashiach depends on his deeds. The more, or shall I say this, the more sensitive a Jew was to spirituality before the Mashiach came, the more sensitive, depending on what his spiritual level is. Which means that not all of us will benefit in the same way from the Mashiach, nor will the Mashiach relate to every Jew in the same way. You can have several people sitting down, for example, and listening to a concert, and each one understands the concert differently, you see. The ones who are more familiar with music will understand the concept at a much higher level. The ones who are less familiar with music will think it's nice, but okay. Every Jew will be awed by the light of the Mashiach. But there are those Jews who will benefit and understand it much better. So therefore, the light of the Mashiach depends, ultimately, on what? On his madrega, or level of ruchnius, spirituality, before the Mashiach came. Now there's one more important thing that you have to realize. And this is an important thing, a very, very important thing about the difference between people in the time of the Mashiach and people now. And it's a striking thing. Right now, can you tell the difference in spirituality between one person and another on the surface?
Yeah.
No, not really. If a tzaddik walks down the street, you cannot really tell that he's a tzaddik. I'm sorry. If he really acts like a tzaddik, whatever the story is, you really can't tell the true spiritual essence and nature of a person. It's not easy to tell. It's not. What you can tell is how wealthy the person is. You can see by his clothes, you can see by the car he drives, you can see by the house he lives on. You can see his what? His material possessions normally. But you can't see the madrega of his neshama. Not only that, most people themselves are not even aware of what the level of their neshama is. The strange thing that will happen when the Mashiach arrives is that you will be able to see these things. So that the person who is on a spiritually higher level is the one who is the richer man. And it will be obvious on the surface. So that suddenly everybody will be jealous, not of the rich people or the people with money or wealth, but they'll be intensely jealous of those people who have a close relationship with Mashiach or who understand him best. The real jealousy, the kinna at that time, will be for the chokhmah that comes with the messianic light. And that's which will earmark each person. Society will be based on that status. Whereas now you have different classes in society. You have what? The lower class, the middle class, and the upper class, and so on and so forth. Class distinctions are made in terms of what? Essentially, financial stability. In the next stage, in the time of Mashiach, there will no longer be that yardstick. The yardstick will be spiritual level. That will be the yardstick. So that literally, the tzaddik will be the most respected person in society. That's strange for us to believe. And the person who's the Amoritz, the one who doesn't know much, is the least respected person in society. Even though the guy's a billionaire, because money doesn't mean anything then. When there's a famine in the land, that famine isn't for cash. You see, it's not for money. That famine is for chokhmah, it's for Torah, it's for understanding, it's for truth. And that famine will what? Create the new values of how important an individual is. So the entire world will be turned upside down when the Mashiach arrives. So that the people who are respected now, because perhaps of their position or their wealth or whatever have you, will not be respected at all. And those who are what? Held in contempt now, will be considered the most elite class in the time of Mashiach. Now you may say, well, okay, so there'll be elite then, and I'm elite now. Okay, so I had my chance, they'll have their chance. But there's a difference. If you were elite because you were very wealthy now, how long did it last? 20 years, 30 years, 50 years? That will last for all eternity. Which one is the trade-off? You think about it. The Moshe in some way is connected to something.
That may be one of the connections. I just had a thought.
The concept that you can see, the spiritual aspect of a person externally is very similar to what we saw in Moshe when he came down from the mountain. They all saw the level that he was on. And the fact of the matter is that his soul shone through. So we do see this kind of an operation occur. I really can't answer that, especially for a woman. Because a woman's olam haba is based on her husband's olam haba.
Not vice versa.
Not vice versa. So therefore, if a woman marries a man who has no interest in learning, she is really doing herself in.
And what about
it's very serious, because she will have no one who's building she builds up an olam haba too, but a woman is very much intimately connected with the olam haba the man builds. And if he has no interest in learning, or if he's a not spiritual person, and he's a nice guy to get along with, I think she will be doing herself a serious disservice. What? I can't answer that. It's a difficult question to answer. How do you convey this?
It's a very
Is it better to stay single? No, it's better to open up a tillim and beg the Bonisham to send you someone who is good. Not stay single.
Sometimes a woman could influence her husband to get better.
Yeah, but can you marry someone on that basis?
Yeah. Well, Rabbi Akiva's wife did.
Well.
Okay,
so you want you look around for Rabbi Akiva. Good luck.
No, look,
that's probably why you're not married. You've got to be satisfied with less than Rabbi Akiva.
I know.
Didn't she say this before she got married to him?
What's that?
Mr. Akiva.
They're getting married?
Who?
Wasn't this a stipulation before they got married?
Who?
Between
yeah.
What's her name?
Rachel.
Yeah.
Rachel, yeah.
Before they got married, this was discussed.
Yeah.
I mean, it was accepted that this is what he was
going to do. Yeah. That's why she married him, only on that basis. Yeah.
But that answers your first question.
Let's say,
thank you.
and Gilgul.
That's another interesting question, Tom. But these really go with the powerful fields, the whole different area. Men can come back as I'm not clear on that. I don't have that's a whole area because of the Gilgulim and Shamas and Zivugim. This it's a difficult area. I'm really.
Neshama has no sex.
What's that? No.
No gender.
Gender.
No, Neshama doesn't. That's also another. That's not so simple. Yeah, it's not. Yes, I can't.
It's different aspects.
Different aspects. The feminine gender there is different in Neshama. I can't really answer that. I don't really answer.
It's possible to have within a person because it's so close to the
It's possible to what?
Have within a person, the sparks of neshama, certain gilgul, have more than one at the same time.
Yes, it's something called an ego.
One kind of finishes what it's doing, and then the next one takes over. The person almost enters an entirely different phase of his life.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Sometimes.
No. Someone else has it?
Sometimes,
Physical body, let's say staying for 25 years, and then it shocks itself and leaves, and a new neshama comes in.
They just start off with different sparks, and that they manifest, and then one finishes whatever work it is that it does.
That's one of the metaphysical explanations.
They don't leave. They keep coming.
That's one of the explanations for schizophrenia and things like that. If you get Shibukim and they're coming like that, the person can't control.
No, or it goes higher. What happens if they go higher?
I don't know. In any case, that's a different.
Source in this room, but I heard it from a source.
That's a different thing. It's a whole different story about Gilgulim and Ibur. The Ibur, what's called Gilgul, what's called
The
Ibur.
person has to be a righteous, fairly righteous
We're not
person.
talking about that.
Yeah, it's a whole different story.
What happens if you're on one level with the neshama, and then the neshama grows and develops spiritually? Can it raise in one lifetime?
Yes, you can raise the sound. Well, you heard that it has to be, you said that a person has to be a very righteous person to have another neshama come down.
An Ibor, only an Ibor.
To help him.
Right, because an Ibor is almost righteous tzaddik, therefore he would come to another person who is a fairly righteous person himself, because that other person has to be doing a similar type of work to what that Ibor was engaged in.
And that Ibor can then help thee.
Right.
But he will only come to a person who's already very high.
Yeah. Not a complete tzaddik. A complete tzaddik doesn't need an Ibor.
That's an incomplete tzaddik.
Right.
But the thing which characterizes the Mashiach strongly is the fact that he teaches Klal Yisrael this messianic life, and this is probably the most powerful relationship that he has with the Jews. The powers of the Mashiach are extraordinary. You see, what does the Mashiach look like as a finished product? Well, the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says in a charismatic way, he says several things, and I'd like to discuss the Mashiach as a finished product. What is the Mashiach as a finished product? Well, what the Medrash says is that the Mashiach is greater than the Malachim. Okay? He's greater than the angels themselves. That's number one. Number two, the Mashiach is literally a living Beit HaMikdash, such that the Shekhinah descends on the Mashiach himself, which is astounding. You see, it does so on three individuals: on the Mashiach ben Yosef, on the Mashiach ben David, and on Moshe Rabbeinu. The Shekhinah descends. What does that mean? The Shekhinah descends. That means anybody who comes into the vicinity of the Mashiach feels like he was by the Beit HaMikdash. He suddenly feels a full power of spirituality, which is an astounding thing. So the Mashiach seems to be almost like a mobile Beit HaMikdash. The Ramchal says that the tzura, the appearance of the Mashiach is awesome. He says just to look at him is awesome. Because it's not a question of seeing an individual who's good looking or a king who's very powerful. The fact that there's so much spirituality attached to this man, you see, presents an appearance of astounding reverence, so that people in his presence literally shake. That the power of the man, the spirituality which is invested in him, gives one a sense of enormous power and enormous depth and elevation, such as never appeared on a human being on the face of the earth. And what does it to him is the messianic light, because it's his neshama which shines through. So you're dealing with an individual who's astounding. I mean, anyone who comes in his presence, there's no question that he's a Mashiach. And people just, sit there, they shake in his presence, in any kind of sense. He would also have extraordinary powers of understanding, of course. I mean, there's no question that he'd be able to look into any individual and know everything about him. His Ruach HaKodesh is awesome. And he will know everything about an individual, about his past, about whatever happened and so on. Whatever they say about Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, there's many, many, many more times what they will say of the Mashiach, because the Mashiach will be the wisest man who has ever existed. He excels in Chokhmah, much greater than Shlomo Melech or anyone. The Mashiach excels in wisdom. His Chokhmah is so astounding that he will be able to convince the entire world and show the entire world of the absolute existence of God. You see, he will be able to deal with anyone on his own turf, all scientists and all Chachamim of any different nation, and deal with them in exactly the same way. So that his ability to understand Torah and understand all wisdom, like I say, is enormous proportions. And what what it says there is that Mashiach has a greater wisdom than the Malachim themselves. And obviously that's a very, very high plane. And you're dealing with a living man, a basic living man. And that's what it is. The Mashiach will also be a prophet. You see, he will have Nevuah, but he will not be the greatest prophet. The greatest prophet was and will always be Moshe Rabbeinu. So that Moshe is the one who excels in the power of prophecy. But as far as wisdom goes, Mashiach is greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. But as far as prophecy goes, Moshe, you see, will and always will be considered the greatest prophet, because the Torah says, "Lo come novi od Israel," and no prophet has ever risen in Israel like Moshe Rabbeinu, and that includes the Mashiach. But the Mashiach will be far greater than Moshe Rabbeinu in Chokhmah, or in wisdom itself. Now at that time, the Mashiach will elevate Klal Yisrael so that all the Jews then will begin to partake in the Messianic life. And what will happen is that all Jews will become prophets. All Jews will become prophets. That's right. Everyone who lives in the time of Mashiach will be a prophet. The Goyim will not be prophets, but the Jews will. Even children. All of them. No, unrighteous will not. You have to be worthy of being a prophet. And your prophecy will depend on your level. But anyone who survives into the Messianic period will be a prophet at that time. Now the truth is, I am talking about certain characteristics which exist in the Messianic period, not really before. And what I really have to get into is the next concept called Kibbutz Goliath. And that's the next basic idea that we really have to speak about. The Mashiach ben Yosef will redeem all the Jews from all the countries of the world and bring them all back to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. He will do that because he will have the ability to handle every Gentile nation. And in that sense, the Mashiach will not only take out the Jews, but Moshe Rabbeinu only took out the Jews from Egypt. The Mashiach will take out all the Jews from all the countries of the world. And that includes the 10 tribes. The 10 north tribes will be identified by the Mashiach. Actually, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto says they'll be identified by the Mashiach ben David, interestingly enough, not the Mashiach ben Yosef. And they will be again also redeemed just like the rest of the Jews are as well. They will all be brought back to the land of Israel. Now the question is, how is the Mashiach going to get the Jews out of the land of the Goyim? That's the interesting question. And then we begin to come into the enormous conflict that will exist in the Messianic period. Because you see, even though the Mashiach arrives, and the Jews realize he's Mashiach, and the Jews begin to elevate as a people, the redemption has really only begun. Because now you're going to come into an enormous source of tension and conflict between the Mashiach and the nations of the world. Now starts the real and final battle for the truth. You see. And what we will begin to come into is the battle, the war between the Mashiach and the nations of the world. That, I think, we will discuss next time. I don't think